In 16 AD, the Roman army was no longer fighting on open ground. Deep inside Dacia, Trajan's forces were moving through forests, mountain valleys, and narrow approaches toward Sarmizegetusa Regia, the political heart of Decebalus's kingdom. Soldiers cut trees, cleared routes, built roads, and raised fortified camps behind the advance. Supply wagons followed slowly through terrain that favored defenders. Scouts and auxiliary troops searched ridgelines and mountain paths where an ambush could delay an entire column. Sarmizegetusa was not an isolated city waiting on a plain. It stood within a wider defensive system of fortresses, towers, protected approaches, and strongpoints spread through the Orushtia Mountains. To reach the Dacian center, Rome first had to penetrate the network around it. That meant legionaries were doing far more than fighting. Trajan's column repeatedly shows Roman soldiers cutting timber, digging ditches, building roads, constructing camps, and crossing rivers. These images are part of an imperial monument, not a neutral documentary record, but they reflect a central reality of the campaign. Before Rome could defeat Decebalus in the mountains, it had to make the mountains usable for Roman warfare. The Dacians did not need to offer one decisive battle. They could withdraw uphill, defend narrow approaches, hold fortified heights, strike supply routes, and force the Romans to reduce strongpoint after strongpoint. The defensive landscape gave Decebalus time, protection, and opportunities to slow an invading army. But Rome kept advancing. A road could be cleared, then protected. A camp could become a base. A captured position could receive a garrison. Supplies could move forward. Engineers could open another route, and the army could begin again. Every kilometer crossed by Trajan's forces could become part of a growing military network behind them. By 106, this was the greatest danger facing Decebalus. The question was no longer simply whether Dacian warriors could defeat a Roman unit in battle. They had done that before. The deeper question was whether the kingdom could stop an entire imperial system that could fight, build, fortify, supply, and then continue moving after every obstacle. Rome had invaded Dacia before and suffered catastrophic defeats. So what had changed? How had Trajan turned the Danube from a frontier into a route of invasion? How had he transformed legionaries, auxiliaries, cavalry, engineers, roads, bridges, camps, and supply columns into a machine capable of conquering a mountain kingdom? The answer would not be found in a single sword or one famous battle. It lay in Rome's ability to transform victory, engineering, manpower, and logistics into steady pressure across hostile terrain. To understand why Sarmizegetusa was now running out of space, we have to return to the wars that had already proved Dacia could make Rome bleed. To understand why Trajan invaded Dacia, we have to return to the reign of Domitian, when Rome learned that the kingdom north of the Danube could inflict serious damage on imperial forces. During the 80s AD, Dacian forces crossed into Moesia and created a major crisis along the frontier. Rome responded with a counteroffensive. In 86, the Praetorian prefect Cornelius Fuscus led troops across the Danube, but the expedition ended in a severe defeat. Ancient tradition associates these wars with the destruction of a Roman legion, although the exact unit and circumstances remain debated. The lesson was unmistakable. Dacia was not a small tribal society that could be intimidated by the reputation of the legions. At the center of Dacian resistance stood Decebalus. He proved capable of organizing forces, exploiting mountain terrain, strengthening fortifications, seeking allies, and negotiating when necessary. He understood that survival against Rome required more than courage in battle. Dacia needed depth, defensible strongholds, political flexibility, and the ability to recover after losses. Rome eventually struck back. In 88 AD, forces under Tedius Julianus defeated the Dacians at Tapae. Yet the wider strategic situation prevented Domitian from completing a conquest. He accepted an agreement with Decebalus instead. The Dacian king remained on his throne. Under the settlement, Dacia functioned in some respects as a client kingdom and received Roman assistance. From a practical viewpoint, the arrangement could stabilize the frontier, but it also created an uncomfortable political image. Rome was providing resources to a ruler whose forces had recently inflicted serious losses on Roman armies. When Trajan became emperor in 98 AD, This unresolved relationship remained. A strong Dacian kingdom stood immediately north of the Danube, commanded by an experienced ruler who had already demonstrated that Roman expeditions could fail. For Trajan, the issue involved security, prestige, and control of the frontier. Economic motives also mattered, but they should not replace the military explanation. Dacia possessed valuable mineral resources, including gold, as well as productive agricultural land. Conquest therefore promised significant economic rewards. But saying that Trajan invaded simply because he wanted Dacian gold reduces a complex frontier war to treasure hunting. Gold made Dacia valuable. Decebalus made it dangerous. The Danube itself was the next problem. It formed one of Rome's great frontiers, but it was not an impassable wall. Along the river, the empire had developed forts, ports, military roads, garrisons, ships, supply depots, and crossing points. Bases such as Viminacium allowed Rome to concentrate troops and material close to Dacia. Trajan began to treat the river not only as a defensive boundary, but as the starting line for invasion. When in 101 AD, he personally led Roman forces across the Danube. Modern reconstructions suggest that major columns crossed at different points before joining deeper inside the theater of operations. This reduced some logistical pressure, threatened multiple approaches, and made it more difficult for Decebalus to concentrate against a single crossing. Trajan's objective was now larger than punishment. He was not crossing the river merely to win one battle, avenge an earlier humiliation, or force another apology from the Dacian king. He intended to break Dacia's ability to remain a permanent military threat. And unlike earlier punitive expeditions, this campaign would demand sustained occupation of routes, crossings, fortified positions, and supply corridors far beyond the Danube frontier. To do that, Rome would need more than legionaries standing in a battle line. It would need auxiliaries, cavalry, engineers, roads, camps, bridges, siege equipment, and a supply system capable of pushing an army through mountains. The First Dacian War was about to test the entire Roman military machine. The legionary remained the heavy infantry core of Trajan's army. A typical soldier might carry a scutum, gladius, pilum, helmet, armor, such as mail or lorica segmentata, depending on unit and individual, and personal marching tools. Yet Roman strength did not come from equipment alone. Legionaries were trained to march, dig, build camps, raise fieldworks, fight in formation, assault fortified positions, and hold ground under pressure. A legion was therefore not simply a battlefield formation. It was also a disciplined body of labor capable of reshaping the terrain around it. Trajan drew forces from numerous legions across the Danubian and other frontiers. Units associated with the Dacian Wars include 7 Claudia, 4 Flavia Felix, I Adiutrix, 2 Adiutrix, XII Gemina, and detachments from other legions. But documentary narration should avoid pretending that every legion marched into Dacia at full strength simultaneously. Roman armies frequently used vexellationes, detachments drawn from larger formations for specific campaigns. What Trajan concentrated was a broad pool of legionary manpower, not necessarily a fixed number of complete legions, operating together throughout both wars. Just as important were the auxilia. Auxiliary units provided capabilities that the legions did not always supply in the same quantity. They included archers, cavalry, lighter infantry, scouts, and troops accustomed to different styles of warfare. Trajan's column repeatedly depicts auxiliaries fighting with equipment distinct from legionaries, including oval shields and lighter battlefield roles. In the forests and mountains of Dacia, these troops were especially valuable because they could screen columns, patrol difficult ground, pursue raiders, and operate where dense heavy infantry formations were less flexible. Cavalry gave the Roman army another kind of reach. Mounted troops could scout ahead, protect flanks, carry messages, pursue defeated enemies, cut off retreat routes, and hunt leaders trying to escape. This became increasingly important during the final phase of the conquest. When Decebalus fled after the collapse of the central Dacian defenses, mobile Roman forces continued the pursuit across a wide landscape. The famous representation of his death on Trajan's column preserves this final stage of the chase. The Dacians, however, possessed weapons capable of inflicting serious wounds. The most famous was the falx, a curved blade that could strike with frightening force. Roman soldiers appear to have increased protection in some contexts, including reinforcement for helmets and the use of arm defenses known as manichae. But the falx should not be turned into a mythical superweapon. Manichae existed in other Roman military contexts, and ordinary Roman armor did not suddenly become useless. The better conclusion is that Dacian weapons were dangerous enough to influence protective choices and tactical awareness. The most powerful Roman advantage may have been engineering. Trajan's column constantly shows soldiers cutting timber, digging ditches, building roads, constructing camps, crossing rivers, and raising fortifications. These scenes are part of a victory monument, but they also reflect the practical demands of campaigning in Dacia. Mountains that slowed an army could be crossed by opening roads. A road could end in a fortified camp. That camp could protect supplies, troops, and workers. From there, another road could be pushed deeper into hostile territory. Rome could literally build its advance. This was why the marching camp mattered so much. Roman troops did not need to spend every night exposed in enemy country. Camps provided protection against surprise attacks, secured baggage and food, created rallying points, helped organize medical care, and maintain discipline. Some temporary positions could later support longer occupation or become part of a wider network of forts and supply routes. Siege warfare added another layer. When Roman forces confronted fortified Dacian positions, they could employ artillery, missile engines, assault works, shields, and formations, such as the testudo. Trajan's column includes scenes of Roman troops approaching defended positions under organized protection. The precise interpretation of individual reliefs must remain cautious, but the broader message is clear. The army was expected to solve fortified obstacles as well as defeat enemies in open battle. All of this depended on logistics. Legionaries needed grain and replacement equipment. Horses required fodder, archers needed arrows, engineers needed timber, tools, metal, ropes, and skilled workers. Camps needed water. Siege operations consumed time and material. Roads and bridges required labor before they could carry anything forward. That is why Trajan's army cannot be understood as legionaries with superior swords. Its power came from integration. Heavy infantry held and assaulted. Auxiliaries scouted and fought in flexible roles. Cavalry extended the army's reach. Engineers created roads, bridges, camps, and siege works. Supply systems kept all of them moving. The Roman legion was dangerous because the same army that won a battle could build a road the next morning, raise a fort that evening, and cross the next river without stopping the campaign. In Dacia, that ability alone would matter more than any single weapon. In 101 AD, Trajan launched the First Dacian War by carrying Roman forces across the Danube. Modern reconstructions suggest that major columns crossed at different points before converging deeper inside Dacia. This distributed the logistical burden and forced Decebalus to watch several routes at once. Once across the river, however, the invasion did not become easy. Tapae stood on one of the key approaches into the Dacian interior. Roman and Dacian armies had fought here before Trajan's reign, and in 101, it again became a major obstacle. The Dacians were fighting on familiar ground. They knew the terrain, possessed dangerous close combat weapons, and had a defensive system extending beyond any single battlefield. According to modern summaries of the campaign, Trajan defeated the main Dacian force at Tapae and continued pressing toward the heartland. But victory at Tapae did not open a straight road to Sarmizegetusa. Every Roman advance lengthened the supply line behind it. Roads had to be secured. Camps had to be built. Food and equipment had to move through difficult country. Bridges and river crossings needed protection. Fortified positions had to be captured, bypassed, or isolated. A column that advanced too quickly risked leaving vulnerable communications behind it. This is one reason the campaign should not be told as if Rome won one battle and simply marched to the Dacian capital. Conquering a mountain kingdom required time. Decebalus also understood that he did not need to destroy Trajan in a single engagement. He could threaten Roman communications, seek allies, pressure the Danube frontier elsewhere, and force Rome to divide attention across several directions. Dacian and allied forces continued to create dangerous fighting beyond the main Roman advance. The war therefore became a contest of endurance as much as battlefield skill. Trajan's army had to keep moving while also protecting everything behind it. That was where Rome's military system mattered most. A legionary victory only became useful if engineers could improve the route, camps could secure the ground, auxiliaries could patrol the surrounding terrain, and supplies could follow the army forward. As Roman pressure increased, Decebalus gradually lost freedom of movement. The invasion reached far enough into Dacia to threaten the political and military center of his kingdom. Fortified positions were compromised. Roman forces demonstrated that they could remain beyond the Danube rather than simply raid and withdraw. By 102 AD, the pressure had become severe enough for Decebalus to seek peace. Trajan imposed harsh conditions intended to reduce Dacia's ability to threaten Rome again. Ancient accounts describe demands involving the surrender or destruction of fortifications, limits on military preparation, the return of deserters and specialists, and a deeper dependence on Roman authority. The First War was therefore a Roman victory. But it was not yet a complete conquest. Decebalus remained alive. He remained king. He retained supporters, territory, and the ability to rebuild. This distinction is essential. In 102 AD, Rome had forced Dacia into a weaker political and military position, but it had not transformed the kingdom into a Roman province. Trajan returned from the campaign with prestige and favorable terms, yet the central problem remained unresolved. A defeated Decebalus was still Decebalus. And a weakened Dacia was still a kingdom across the Danube, with mountains, fortresses, manpower, and the memory of having defeated Roman armies before. The settlement therefore contained the seeds of another war. If Decebalus accepted Roman restrictions permanently, Dacia might survive as a subordinate power. If he rebuilt his defenses and rejected those limits, Trajan would face the same strategic problem again. That is exactly what happened. The First Dacian War had shown that Rome could cross the Danube, defeat major forces, and push deep into the interior. The second would be fought for a more final objective. Trajan would no longer cross the frontier simply to force better terms. He would cross it to destroy Decebalus's kingdom as an independent military power. After the peace of 102 AD, the conflict between Rome and Dacia did not disappear. Ancient sources accused Decebalus of rebuilding fortifications, restoring military strength, resisting Roman restrictions, and seeking new allies. Whatever the precise sequence, the settlement did not produce a stable frontier. For Trajan, the First War had weakened Dacia, but it had not removed the kingdom as an independent military power. By 105 AD, another confrontation had become unavoidable. This time, Rome prepared for something more final. The greatest symbol of that preparation was the immense bridge across the Danube at Drobeta, traditionally associated with the architect Apollodorus of Damascus. The structure allowed Roman forces to move men, animals, equipment, and supplies across the river with greater regularity. It reduced dependence on temporary crossings and made communication between the two banks far more reliable. The bridge did not win the war by itself. Beyond it still lay forests, mountains, narrow roads, fortified heights, and the forces loyal to Decebalus. But it transformed the strategic problem. The Danube was no longer simply a frontier to be crossed at great risk. It became part of a permanent invasion route. Rome had built its way across the boundary. Decebalus had little reason to risk everything in one open battle. After the experience of the First War, a prolonged defense offered better possibilities. Dacian forces could withdraw into the mountains, occupy strongholds, strike at communications, and force Rome to spend time and resources reducing one position after another. Trajan answered with method rather than speed. Roman troops advanced by securing routes, cutting roads through difficult terrain, establishing camps, occupying high ground, and leaving garrisons behind. Each captured or bypassed position helped protect the next movement forward. Supplies followed through the network being created behind the army. This was the central strength of the Roman approach. A Dacian fortress was valuable only while it remained connected to other positions, received supplies, and could support movement through the surrounding landscape. Once Rome controlled the roads and isolated strongpoints, the defensive network began to lose the very connections that made it effective. The Orustie Mountains contained a complex system of Dacian fortifications surrounding the political center at Sarmizegetusa Regia. These were not simply walls around one city. They formed a broader military landscape of defended approaches, elevated positions, watchpoints, and strongholds, protecting access to the heart of Decebalus's kingdom. Rome therefore had to conquer the approaches before it could conquer the center. Trajan's column presents repeated scenes of soldiers building, marching, fighting, and attacking fortified positions. It remains one of the most important visual sources for the wars, but it must be read carefully. The column is a Roman victory monument, not a neutral battlefield camera. Individual scenes cannot always be matched confidently to exact locations or moments. Still, the overall pattern fits the campaign. The Roman army pushed deeper while Dacian space became smaller. Eventually, Trajan's forces reached the defensive system around Sarmizegetusa. The final assault should not be imagined as a simple attack on a rectangular Roman-style city standing alone on open ground. Sarmizegetusa Regia occupied mountainous terrain and was connected to residential, sacred, and defensive areas within a wider fortified zone. Roman success required infantry, engineers, siege works, artillery, protected approaches, and continued logistical support. One famous version of the siege says the Romans cut or disrupted the city's water supply and forced the defenders toward collapse. This possibility has often been connected to scenes on Trajan's column, but archaeology complicates any simple version of the story, because evidence suggests that water sources may have existed within the defended area itself. It is therefore safer to say that Roman pressure on the city's resources and defensive system contributed to its fall, while the exact role of water remains uncertain. What is not uncertain is the result. The central defensive system was broken. Sarmizegetusa fell. Parts of the complex were destroyed or burned. Decebalus's political center ceased to function as the headquarters of an independent kingdom. Roman forces had not merely won another battle. They had dismantled the physical network that allowed the Dacian state to coordinate resistance from its mountain heartland. But Decebalus was still alive. He escaped with followers and attempted to continue resistance beyond the fallen capital. This created one final problem for Trajan. If the king reached another region, gathered loyal forces, or found allies, Rome might still face a prolonged insurgency or renewed war. Now cavalry and other mobile troops became decisive. Roman forces pursued the fleeing king across the countryside. Trajan's column preserves the famous image of Decebalus taking his own life as a mounted Roman soldier closes in. The king chose suicide rather than capture. A funerary inscription later associated the Roman cavalryman Tiberius Claudius Maximus with the pursuit of Decebalus and the presentation of evidence of his death to Trajan. The exact dramatic details cannot be reconstructed, but the broader sequence is clear. Rome pursued the king until he could no longer escape. His death ended the possibility of restoring the same Dacian monarchy under its most capable leader. By 106 AD, the kingdom of Decebalus had collapsed. But this did not mean that every Dacian community disappeared, or that all Dacian territory became Roman. Rome annexed a large and strategically important portion of the conquered kingdom as the province of Dacia, while other populations remained beyond the new imperial frontier. The victory was therefore political and military, not the destruction of an entire people. Trajan had crossed the Danube twice, fought through mountains, reduced fortified positions, and pushed Roman infrastructure into the center of the kingdom. Decebalus had used terrain, fortresses, mobility, and resistance to make conquest costly, but Rome kept advancing. The final campaign demonstrated the deepest strength of Trajan's war machine. Wherever the army moved, roads, camps, bridges, garrisons, engineers, and supply lines moved with it. By the time Sarmizegetusa fell, Rome had not merely reached the heart of Dacia, it had built a military system all the way there permanently. Dacia had already proved that Roman soldiers could be defeated. Dacian forces had ambushed Roman armies, fought effectively in difficult terrain, defended mountain strongholds, and used weapons such as the falx to inflict serious wounds. If the story were simply that one Roman legionary was better than one Dacian warrior, Rome would not have needed repeated campaigns under Domitian and 2 major wars under Trajan. The real difference was the system behind the soldier. Rome could transform conquered ground into military infrastructure. Legionaries and engineers built roads through forests, bridges across rivers, fortified camps in hostile territory, and supply routes that connected each advance to the Danube. Garrisons could remain behind while the main force moved onward. A captured route could be repaired, secured, supplied, and then used as the starting point for the next operation. This is why Trajan's column shows Roman troops building so often. The monument is propaganda as well as evidence, and its scenes should not be treated as a minute-by-minute battlefield record. Yet the repeated emphasis on construction reflects something fundamental about Roman warfare in Dacia. Conquest meant controlling the landscape, not merely defeating men in combat. The legions also did not fight alone. Legionaries provided disciplined heavy infantry, engineering manpower, fortified camps, and the ability to hold or assault difficult positions. Auxilia added cavalry, archers, scouts, lighter infantry, and troops suited to roles the heavy legionary formation could not perform as efficiently. Mounted units could pursue retreating enemies and extend Roman reach far beyond the marching column. Together, these forces could adapt to forests, mountains, valleys, roads, and fortresses. Trajan also possessed something Decebalus could never match on the same scale: the resources of an empire. Rome could draw manpower from multiple provinces, concentrate forces from numerous legions, supply them through established frontier bases, replace equipment, pay troops, move grain, and return to war after a temporary settlement failed. Decebalus could win a battle. Rome could continue the war. That distinction became decisive. The Dacian defensive system depended on mountains, fortresses, protected approaches, and the ability to retreat deeper into the kingdom. But every Roman road pushed farther forward reduced that depth. Every fortified camp created another secure base. Every isolated stronghold weakened the network around Sarmizegetusa. By 106 AD, the kingdom was not defeated by one sword, one formation, or one bridge. It was overwhelmed by sustained pressure from an imperial military system. Trajan did not conquer Dacia with the gladius alone. His army crossed rivers, cut roads through forests, built forts in hostile territory, reduced mountain strongholds, and kept supplies moving behind the advance. Cavalry hunted fleeing enemies. Auxiliaries fought where heavy infantry was less flexible. Engineers transformed the Danube from frontier into supply line. Decebalus had defeated Roman armies before. What he could not ultimately defeat was Rome's ability to make military infrastructure follow every advance. Where the soldiers went, the empire went with them. That was the true weapon behind Trajan's victory and final destruction of Decebalus's kingdom.